Hey everyone, welcome to Working Forward. I'm Izzy Cannell.
And I'm Brad Golden. We're the Workplace Insights team here at BirdSense and your co-hosts of Working Forward. This is where we share stories and forward-thinking ideas with people who are shaping the future of workplaces. Working Forward unites the global workplace community through inspiring conversations with people driving change by sharing ideas you can act on today and revisit whenever you need a little spark.
In this episode, we're joined by Tim Oldman and Allison English from Aéto Strategy. We delve into the concept of de-Shittification, an approach to office design that prioritizes functionality over aesthetics.
We discuss common mistakes organizations make and provide practical strategies to align office layouts with real workflows. We discuss how the employee experience compares to trying to open the door of a Tesla, or we explore how the number of dishwashers could be your true bottleneck in the office. This is a great one, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the nuggets on how to uncover thoughtful design can lead to thriving, productive teams.
Allison, Tim, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. We would love to kick off with hearing a little bit about who you are, what is Aéto, how did you get here?
Good question. Well, it's great to be here, first off. It's a long journey, Izzy, I think. And it started, actually, if I go right back sort of 20 or 30 years, and you look back that far, I think that was the seed of where we are now. So back in 2008, 2009, I became curious about finding ways to measure how corporate workplaces worked for the employees who use them and for the organizations who employed those employees. And in 2009, tripped over a methodology which I launched in 2010 under a brand called Leaseman. The Leaseman Index became the world's best known pre and post occupancy evaluation tool for measuring exactly that, the experience that employees had in the corporate workplace. Alison joined me 9 years ago at Leaseman-ish, roughly. Precision was one of our values, but not anymore. So Alison joined, and the journey accelerated at a pace with a team growing to 50 or more employees. As shareholders, we made a decision to sell that business after the pandemic. The pandemic was actually quite interesting for us. It uncovered lots of things that people had never really been aware of before, like the average home supporting the average employee better than the average office. That was a bit of a sort of shock horror moment for us and from a research perspective and from our clients who were using the tool back then. But we made the decision as shareholders to sell the business. And at about the same time, a bunch of clients started getting really curious about the data that they were amassing, including some of your data with one of those clients. And they started saying, look, hey, could you put this other data we have next to your Leaseman data? And we started saying, that's not what Leaseman do. Leaseman is a non-advisory practice. We don't go there. And one of those clients said, I'd really like you to go there. And it's the sort of client you don't say no to. So we said, okay, we'll do some pattern observation. We won't consult, we won't advise, but we'll see what we find in the numbers. And we did that. And we started to reveal some quite interesting correlations and some causations. And it started to point those clients in new directions about how they consider their workplace. And so progressively, Alison and I saw two things happening, really. It was a number of clients with an increasing appetite for data-driven decision-making in their corporate real estate programs, and the risk that the more that we did that at Leaseman, the more it might compromise the independence that Leaseman had spent 15 years building its brand reputation around. And so we approached the new owners of Leaseman and said, look, this is a situation we think is about to start bubbling to the surface. We think it might be opportune for us to spin off in a complementary way what is starting to happen. Collectively, we thought that was going to be a good idea. Turned out to be a great idea. And Alison and I have now spent nearly 18 months, 19 months having fun, helping clients really just understand at a new depth and a new layer of exploration what's really happening inside their organizations.
I think this is really interesting, the place you came from of being very in the data, not in the advisory, right? And now you're kind of making a pretty big pivot there in really different conversations, I imagine, than you were.
It is. If I'll just jump in, Tim, sorry if that's all right. But the advisory we do is largely based on data, and all of it's based on evidence. We're not doing things based on gut feel. It's taking everything that we found and do at Leaseman, harnessing all of that again, alongside a whole suite of kind of other tools and things that we can look at now, and then helping organizations drive their future of work strategies based on that. So the Leesman part was just an incredible jumping off platform to move into something broad.
And it feels like in many instances, what the data is doing is starting a new type of conversation. So it isn't all just about numbers and tables and charts and observing number patterns. It's also catalyzing a quality and depth of conversation that involves different stakeholders that perhaps before didn't trust quite or didn't see their role in let's call it a design process. But when you confront them with numbers that show patterns that can reveal things that are going on that they weren't aware of, or things that they were aware of but didn't know how to articulate and how to respond to from a design perspective, is creating wholly different quality and depth of conversation across leadership teams and real estate teams engaging with executive leadership teams above them, or real estate teams engaging in much deeper and more meaningful conversations with the design practitioners that they pull around them.
Yes, it's interesting the way that, I think in the workplace strategy world, we've talked for a long time about how real estate is the tool, right? It's another tool in the tool belt for leadership to ensure that their teams are productive and creating the widgets and, happy as well as employees and all of that. But I think that's still, to some C-suites, not necessarily an ingrained concept, right? That this is a tool, the design itself is part of that tool set that they have available to them, and bringing the data in to help them understand that, I think it continues to be an interesting conversation with a lot of our customers.
And in the UK, we have a bit of statute law, retail law around the purchase of products and services, which says quite simply, let the buyer beware, which is effectively placing the responsibility on the buyer to understand what they're in the market for, to do their homework properly, to engage with the seller of services, products or advisory services, and be a good buyer. And I think there are certainly instances where we can see at a distance the design industry has been somewhat underserviced, I think, in certain quarters by clients who are unclear or they don't know what they really need. One of our fundamental questions is, why workplace? If as an organization you can't clearly articulate the role that workplace is playing in your organizational performance of the future, then I don't think you're a good buyer of design and workplace advisory services. So I think we have to, a lot of what we're doing is, if you like, counseling organizations to go back to the very basics and using data to instigate many of those conversations. So it's always evidence-based. But then to say, come on, let's just get really clear here. What role does the workplace play in your organization 3, 5, 10 years down the path?
Yeah. So Tim and Allison, as part of this work with Aéto, or as Aéto, who are you working with? Are you working with the same stakeholders you were working with before? Is it a different set of stakeholders? Are you working with a wider or smaller set of stakeholders? Curious how that's changed for you.
Some of them are the same, but I would also say it's a broader group. At Leesman, it was measuring experience, which was typically driven by there was a global head of experience or someone in real estate owned that function. The work that we're doing now looks more broadly. Again, at data, it looks more at strategy. So there are people teams who are involved. Technology is more involved. Technology and people have been more involved in real estate anyway, as of late. But certainly the insights we're playing back and the work that we're doing with strategy touches all of those, as well as sometimes kind of the most senior leaders within the C-suite. So it is a much broader range because the work that we're doing is farther reaching. The clients who are working with us tend to be those who are a little bit more forward thinking, at least from what we're finding. And their teams are naturally more interested and curious about what they can get out of real estate and how real estate can benefit the organization and help them, again, achieve those organizational goals. So that's why it's not just someone sitting in real estate. They're not just trying to deliver a project because they have to move people into a new space. They're looking wider and trying to actually achieve something different for the business out of that.
Right.
So super cool. I think we can dive into it right now. And there's a through line that I've experienced with you guys and getting to know you over the last couple of years. From Leesman, there's just this pure, true authenticity that has, in essence, come through with Aéto as well. And it's very refreshing in the industry. And you guys tend to keep things real. And you've brought to the market this concept. We call it the de-shittification of workplace design. What is de-shittification of workplace design?
Well, we borrowed de-shittification from in-shittification. In-shittification is a term coined by an author and journalist, Cory Doctorow. And he started using that term a couple of years ago. It's been adopted by a few dictionaries. He published a book last year on it. But it basically talks about kind of the degradation of experience in platforms, and it usually relates to technology. So if you think about, I don't want to name any companies and call them out, but if you think about, if you're a member of a certain service, at the beginning, they're trying to gain users. So they make everything amazing and everything free for you and everything really, really great. And as the user base grows, they go, okay, now I want to I can start exploiting these users and start getting people to sponsor this. So the shift focuses from the user to advertisements. And slowly the experience for the user degrades. But it's become a sticky product. So you still use it, you still buy it, but you kind of become a bit jaded. And then eventually those companies end up focusing on purely shareholders. And so it's about the lack of focus on the users who actually matter and who are experiencing that. And we thought that was a really relevant connection because we see the same happening in workplace design. There's an award for, the best feature staircase, which I don't know how many employees go into a new space and think, oh my God, I'm so glad they spent so much money building this feature staircase. Now, why the hell can't I work at my desk?
To be fair, I didn't get my actual job starting days, Allison, but I'm also just like a workplace design nerd. But I totally relate to you. Like, I totally get it, right? Like, why are employees coming to the office? They're not coming for a staircase necessarily.
Right. And if there's a way to connect that staircase to, again, achieving what employees need, build all the staircases you want, like actually make it happen. But it seems like it's more for aesthetics and more because that's something that's more interesting to design than the at-desk experience. Right. It's something that's a little bit, it's more unique and you can put your stamp on it, right? And we see a problem with that, again, coming from the background of Leisman and measuring workplace experience, because that doesn't seem to be genuinely about the user. And that's what we're calling.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like, the back in the day when we had like a ton of bleacher seating and that was like, kind of still is, but like really what's the point? Nobody ever actually sits in those, or you're not necessarily having town halls. It's just more so of a feature set, or maybe even the ping pong table that's in the corner that never gets used, but you can claim that you have a ping pong table in your office. And so it becomes kind of this social currency that really has no purpose or no point. And then it's, degrading to the employee experience.
I think it's
Yeah.
I think it's also about the in-shittification of services followed a period of shrinkflation as well, right? Another economics term where FMCG organizations started just minutely shrinking their product, changing the ingredient mix to make it more economically viable for them. But the packaging stayed the same size. And effectively, a lot of them followed a buy one, get one free promotion. And so you were seduced in, and then suddenly the new packaging is unveiled. And you don't realize that you're buying a lesser product for a slightly higher price. And I think the same happened in workplace. And that's what's caused a lot of the enshittification. That, if you're old enough to remember, and probably you lot aren't, which is revealing my further years, but like my experience, like my gathered life experiences. You got some gray there. Yeah, okay. Right. CRT monitors, right? Monitors that had backs to them that were like that deep that then you rammed into the corner of a workstation. So we had corner core workstations, which were in your language, 6 foot by 6 foot, right? And a nice curve, and you sort of nestled in them. You had 2 pedestals for all of your rubbish. So your stale Ryvita crackers, your stinky strainers from sneakers and all this stuff, right? And that was your space. Right. But the facility management team and the designers came along and they say, hey, look what the technologists have given us, all these flat screen monitors. Awesome. We don't need a corner core workstation anymore, which was, I think, a natural progression. But the consequence of the loss of the corner core workstation was a tighter back-to-back dimension for workstation. And then what started to happen is like, okay, you're not going to get 2 pedestals anymore. You're going to get 1 pedestal. And then we started going paperless. And so there was the argument, well, you don't need storage space for your Rivitas and your stinky sneakers because it's not paper anymore that you're storing in there that you're meant to be storing in there. And by the way, you're not going to have your own little stationery collection at your workstation. We're going to have, and so all of these sorts of efficiency initiatives that started squashing the employee, literally the space per person over the last 20 years has been shrunk. And then when we really went paperless, there were times when we used to do storage audits. You'd count how many linear meters a lawyer had available to them to store their matter. And now all of that's gone. And the storage cabinets have gone. But when we took all those metal storage cabinets out, what do? We pushed the employee nearer to the corridor. And so we shrunk the real estate footprint, the experiential footprint of the colleague further and further down. And that's led to this progressively shittier and shittier workplace experience because we're just tied to that. And we've got one client who given engineers these super widescreen monitors on a 4'8" desk. And now the monitor is nearly touching the next monitor. It's like having the middle seat on a budget airline. And I think this is what we're fighting back against. It's like you're just giving people crappy experiences. You've got them next to tightly managed corridors because the real estate costs have gone up. And so the brief to the designer is, how many people can we squash into this space? And I think that's what we're trying to push back on. We're saying, do not give the money and the glory and the space to the feature staircasing and the bleacher seating without thinking about the experience that the employee has concentrating, doing a day's work at the place when most of them have to commit that concentrative energy.
I think something you said at the end there is an important distinction where you called out, don't give the money to that without also thinking of the other piece, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious if you two can touch on what role you think that the aesthetic part of it does play, because, you could build the perfectly efficient but well experienced based on size, and square footage office, but without those special design moments that can also take away from our day if something is not inspiring, or we don't feel taken care of in other ways with the design. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the role that it does play.
Aesthetic is important. I think it's hard to go into the same space every day and feel inspired kind of day after day. But I think the aesthetic certainly makes a difference. But if you were to throw a Maslow's hierarchy of needs together for a place, aesthetic is not at the bottom. Everyone does. It's not at the bottom. The aesthetic isn't at the bottom. It's okay, what are the basics? So what do employees have to have a frictionless day at work? And then you kind of build from there. So I think that the point is kind of identifying and solving that. And that's kind of where we're seeing that organizations, they might have the data to tell them that, but they might not be looking at it in the right way. They might not have the data that gives them the insight to go, okay, now I get this. And actually, my designer should have this too, so they can design accordingly. And we need to allocate the appropriate amount of space for these types of things. So it's kind of starting there. Also having a thoughtful aesthetic. I was speaking to a client we're going to have on an upcoming panel and said, okay, what's your pet peeve? What's your pet hate at workplace? And he said, stained carpets. He said, or if someone needs to touch up paint around a light switch, and it looks touched up, because I think those are the details that employees will see and go, okay, people here don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
If they let that happen and nothing is done about it. So I think the aesthetics definitely are important, but it's function over form. Function comes first before form.
I think the risk is a little bit like if we're standing on a platform and we're saying, stop with the feature staircases, stop with the bleacher seating. It's like the designer's going to throw a bit of a tantrum, say, you're taking all my fun away, right? But last week I was in Tallinn, in Estonia, looking at...
Being in a sauna there?
I didn't get a sauna there, but I wish I had, because it was minus 12 degrees in our centigrade money, right? So it was...
Next time.
Yeah.
Next time.
They have like a 15, 20 person sauna in the office. I was with Wise, so Wise, the foreign currency transfer platform, have built an incredible office. It's mind-blowingly brilliant. And Izzy, to your point, the amount of design interventions, the iterations, the sort of artistic quality, the design passion in that space was mind-blowing. better than I've seen for a long, long time in terms of the quality that it brought the space. They do have a huge auditorium because they're onboarding people. They're still in hypergrowth as a fintech. So they have an auditorium with bleacher seating, but guess what? It doesn't have like cushions that thick. It has seats on the bleacher seating. So if you're onboarding a new Wiser, they can sit in the auditorium for 90-minute sessions, break, come back, another 90-minute session. And after a day, it's tiring educationally, but it's not tiring because you're sat on a thing without a back on a cushion that's only that thick. And then you step outside.
Designed for a 6-year-old.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Sorry.
Or a mum and dad at a 90-minute soccer game on a Saturday morning. That's like design form follows function. And I think that's the basics. Brad, you touched on it earlier. Like, let's get back to the basic disciplines of delivering outstanding design. It should talk to the user. So we'll try and get some stuff on our website, I think, profiling the outstanding work that Wise are doing. Like that example said to me, design is far from dead. There are so many places the designer can exhibit outstanding skills, delivering an incredible day at work. And it's a space that has a really, really high Leesman score. So, it's verified statistically. We've seen it. We're doing lots of observational analysis and understanding of quite how it's delivered those successes, including the sauna, which I'll use next time, Brad.
Okay. I want to all day back. Yeah. So getting like, why are we here right now? I think a lot of what I'm thinking about is around fear and like kind of this like fear-based way of navigating. And one thing, and based on your suggestion, was looking at alternative data points. One thing that we've come across is looking at the turnover rate of CEOs. And so this is the CEO turnover rate is up 20% since the pandemic, which, as you can imagine, creates like this spiral downwards into the organization from a stability standpoint or instability standpoint. How are people navigating this fear and, instead of just kind of grabbing those spiral staircases and saying, oh, let's put this in here. What's attributing to this?
I think it's hard to be different. If you do different and you do it well, then everybody lauds you. If you're different and you screw it up, then you get fired. So it's not like we talk about this like fail fast and try, test and learn, but we don't have a work culture in general that's set up to do that. If the CEO underperforms or areas of the business underperform, they lose budget and they possibly lose their jobs. So we're not driven, I guess we're not incentivized to behave in that way. So I think that's part of the problem. So for a lot of organizations and for a lot of business leaders, it's significantly safer if they look around and go, okay, everyone else is doing, everyone else in my sector is doing this, having people in 4 days a week or 3 days a week or doing this to their workplaces or whatever. I'm going to make the same decision. Now, some bold ones are saying, actually, I want to be different because I believe that this differentiation is useful from a talent standpoint or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, a 20-person soft, but Wise, like, come on, I've never heard of that before, and I want to go.
I think, but Brad, that's what that is the Wise executive leadership team and the head of property saying, we want to be authentically Wise. And in Estonia, saunas are a big thing. So for the office in Tallinn, culturally, there's an expectation. I mean, it was minus 12 centigrade, like I said, when I was there. And so people are coming in with big snow boots and big coats. And the coat racks have like plenty of space for coats and a shoe rack underneath to take off your winter boots. And then people are walking around in slippers and sliders all day, right? Which if in London, would people be like, what the, would recoil at that? Because it's just culturally not the expectation in London to be wearing a pair of slippers that you picked up, like the free ones in the hotel, right? But in Estonia, in Wise's office, it was just culturally cool. And so what they had is a quality of authenticity, which I think you've got to applaud the leadership culture that creates that. And so I think, pinning bad interior design, bad workplace design, and trying to link that to CEO turnover is a pretty tenuous connection, I think. But I think what we are seeing is the work that we're doing. There is a common factor, I think, which is leadership teams and executive leaders who are absolutely clear about what their organization is there to do, and their what we're calling a belief system. Define your belief system, and then let everything cascade from there.
Yeah, it's interesting on this topic of fear and of doing things differently as a business and authentically. We work with a lot of customers, as I'm sure you do, who ask about benchmarks, but then say, I want to be ahead of the curve. And so there's sort of this tension there of, I want to compare myself to the norm, but I want to be doing things ahead of the curve and differently than others. What does it mean to you two to be ahead of the curve? When you work with customers, where do you see the opportunities for them to be ahead of the curve?
I think benchmarking is useful because it establishes where you stand. In order to be ahead of the curve, you kind of have to know where the curve is. So it's certainly, there's value in understanding kind of your part of the playing field. But I guess if someone came to us and said, I want to be ahead of the curve, we would probe them to define that further. So what exactly does that mean to them? What does success actually mean to that department, to that organization? Because I think, again, if you're trying to be ahead of the curve, to me, it sounds like you're looking around at what everyone else is doing and trying to leapfrog them, which will be challenging. But the only way to do that is to stop looking around at what everyone else is doing and focus on what you're doing and what you want to do differently from everybody else and what your organization can do differently from everyone else. To Tim's point, it's about that authenticity and what is different, what is unique about you, and how we can help maximize that.
So I think, Izzy, it's almost like, to what end would be our response? You want to be ahead of the curve, like, why? Explain that. Explain that objective. Let's define it really clearly in a way that all of the service providers who are contributing to you achieving that understand it clearly. There must be no ambiguity around it, and it must be measurable. Because I think, some of what's happening is like even that comment, I want to be ahead of the curve. I want to be ahead of the game. Which game? In which respect? Back into your world, is it driving seat utilization in meeting space and in close collaboration? Well, that's a dumb idea if actually what it does is gives everybody a bad experience of the space because the space is poorly designed. It just happens to have a number of seats in there which exceed the amount of seats that can appear in the camera angle on a video call. But let's just define what success is. Is success, I don't know, onboarding those new recruits at Wise in Tallinn faster with a lower staff turnover, where they can hit the ground running sooner? That's the sort of success statements that we try and get our clients to articulate to the teams around them, so that those teams realize what they're contributing to is not a design award or a peer appraisal and peer approval of a piece of aesthetic. It's actually helping that business do what it's setting out to do better, slicker, faster, cheaper, whatever the objective is. Define it and work towards it.
I love that answer. I think, sometimes when we see customers and they're using benchmark, I'm a believer in benchmarks. I think there's a place for it. There are times when you
skeptic, Izzy.
There are times when you see a customer looking at certain benchmarks. Often what's available to them is what the brokerage houses are putting out, right? And you kind of look at it like, well, does having a lower space square foot per square meter per person, does that make you ahead of the curve, right? At a certain point, it starts to become this, who defined what is successful? And to your point, it's probably somebody external to your organization, and so being ahead of the curve starts to lose its value, right, to a business. So yeah, I love that answer. I think it's an internal question that needs to be asked more often at organizations when they're kind of looking at what's available to them from benchmarks. How do they seek other data? How do they redefine the metrics that they need to understand?
The benchmarks, just the last thing on benchmarks, to defend 15 years of having built one of the world's biggest benchmarks. I think they provide really healthy wayfinding and sort of milestone markers. It's not just about the number that comes out the back end. It is also about saying, like, one of the things that we found very early on in the Leesman Index was that if you're building a workplace in a remote location, let's say on an industrial park, on a business park, a lot of our industrial manufacturers, high-tech manufacturers, are in very remote locations. the catering in those locations has to work significantly harder from a food and beverage quality perspective, and variability, and sort of reinventing the menu options, so much harder than if you're in a city center. So it's not just about the importance and the satisfaction benchmark for catering services worldwide. It's actually about having the time and the patience to say, okay, but location A is in downtown Manhattan, where you can, fall out of the door and trip over 30 lunch venues in 3 minutes. But on an industrial manufacturing campus for a high-tech manufacturer in the middle of nowhere on an old airfield in the defense manufacturing world, say, that's it. You're on campus for 9 hours a day, end of. So I think that type of signposting to where more effort, more investment, more design time, more subsidy, whatever it is needed, is where benchmarks can really have a powerful place in workplace strategy.
Tim, you had mentioned something earlier about, well, it was kind of alluding to the purpose of the conference room and looking at utilization and how do we identify like the purpose. Izzy and I were traveling in the Pacific Northwest at a technology company, and they had just revealed a beautiful new campus, which was mostly vacant. And it was just outstanding as far as like aesthetics go, but it just wasn't being used. And I think I'll come back to my experience of feeling incredibly stupid in trying to get into a Tesla car. And when I go through one of those door handles and I just kind of am like, scrambling to figure it out. And then I look at the guy, that's opening the door. That's how you do it. And so I had this incredibly, distasteful experience of something that is so simple and so easy that I've done my entire life just in this one moment because of some sort of aesthetic decision, right? Do we see an equivalent there as far as like, in the workplace? Like what might be a Tesla door handle in the workplace?
Well, I think there's a natural tension that is absolutely right to exist, right? Where a designer's responsibility, whether a product designer, an architect, an interior designer, a landscape designer, whichever designer it is, process designer, they have a responsibility to take us on a path to a better experience, right? That is why you invest in design, for it to be different, for it to be fresher, to be new. So designers have an inbuilt wiring that is inquisitive about different ways of doing stuff. And so you got to allow them that space to explore, because they might just come over something that is a different way of doing something that is wholly refreshing, new, and beneficial to the users of that thing, but not at the expense of the user stood there scratching their head, wondering how to open a door or to start a conference call or find a conference room that's free or whatever it is, right? It's like the process, the physical product, the way that we interact in our human factors with space and with our colleagues should be intuitive. And the best metaphor for this was one I heard, which was like, design is like a joke. If you've got to explain it, it doesn't work, right? And I think that's the sort of way that we should be approaching it. So the door handle on the Tesla adds a minuscule of beneficial outcome to its fluid dynamics and therefore its aerodynamic drag. But from a user experience, everybody, when the Tesla taxi pulls up for the first 10 years of its existence, is going to stand there and scratch their head about how to get in the door. Interestingly, I don't know if I shared it with you, but after you mentioned it, there was a big news headline on the BBC in the UK about Japanese car manufacturers have decided they're going to outlaw flush handles because there's a safety concern.
No.
In the event of an accident, people are rushing up to a car, and if they don't know how to open the door to extricate somebody who's injured, actually it's a safety compromise that is not worth the reduction in aerodynamic drag. So, but I think it's a natural and healthy tension that must exist for design. Designers' job is to push boundaries, to find new landscapes for us, to be trailblazers in minute details and in big picture thinking, but not at the expense of the user experience.
Super valuable insights there. Yeah, I really like the idea of just putting the user first and that not being compromising. I guess another idea to think about is how far do you want to take that design, right? So you might push it too far where you've really gone to a place where it does need an explanation. It's not necessarily intuitive. And I feel like that dance is even inherently more difficult in the built environment, right? Like there's going to be some risks that you need to take just because of the nature of things are built very expensive, and it's very consuming to actually go and make those changes or iterations as well. Kind of curious, do you have any thoughts on that?
Alison, do you want to go on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can see, yes, they should be pushing the envelope. And I can see, like, I'm thinking of those taps that have hot water, sparkling water, and cold water. Tammy Ramone used to have in her office, but it has, like, I don't know, 3 pages of instructions to work it out. So I like the practicality of being able to do that. But I think if you have to sit there and stare at some instructions and go, okay, step 7 said this, and I still can't get water, and you're just trying to make a cup of tea, then I feel like you've overcomplicated something that used to be fairly simple. So I'm all for doing more. And if you need, I don't know, I was telling Tim about this earlier. The house I bought has a particular type of oven in it where you can't set the temperature. You either turn the oven on all the way or it's on halfway.
What?
But yeah, it's complicated. So there's a little bit of, or is it like you have to complicate anybody? It's complicated. Well,
It's like,
it's actually not. You're right. You have to kind of adjust the way you cook and figure out what half is and what all the way on is. But once you do, then it's actually incredibly straightforward. But it's not like any other oven you've ever used. So if you try and use it like another oven, like you're not going to get there. So there's a little bit of, I don't know. I can see the value in a little bit of explanation and a little bit of experimentation. And this oven works for some people and not for others.
I think the Alison's example of the unnamed tap with multiple user interfaces to get the water of your choice, which I never managed to get the water I was after. Like the kitchenette, the food pantry in most offices is like a perfect case study example of where everybody forgot the principles of form follows function, right? And a part of our job often is helping clients get better at some of this sort of stuff. So we spend a lot of time looking at food pantries and refreshment points in offices. And I think what we've also got to understand is the ripple effect of getting it wrong and then not fixing it when the realization is it's wrong. So we've been to offices of global leading organizations where the amount of people on floor has had no bearing on the number of dishwashers that have been put in the pantry. Yet the expectation is for people to have some sort of clear desk and sort of, what do you want to call it, like citizenship model where everybody clears their own desk. You put your dirty stuff in the dishwasher, but there's only one dishwasher and it takes like 20 cups. And so what happens is people start littering the side of the pantry and then putting them in the sink. And then somebody who comes along who wants to wash up their thing in the sink can't, because there's like the detritus of breakfast, lunch, and whatever anybody else has had during the afternoon. So the system starts to fall down. And the minute the system starts to crumble, well, then nobody bothers putting their mug in the dishwasher because they know it's a futile task. Like, what I'm interested in is how many people in that process signed off one dishwasher. The designer drew one dishwasher. The contractor installed one dishwasher. The client signed off one dishwasher. The cost consultant agreed one dishwasher on a cost. It's like, how many people in the professional industry does it take to mess it up? And it seems like increasingly there's an awful lot of people involved in actually making a mess of these things. And sorry for all these, continuous expletives, but like shitting up the workplace. This is what's happening, which is why we're calling for like de-shittification really is about going back to basics. Like just giving people places that work. And I think that's like what we're trying to call for. And you can understand it through data. You can understand it through great design. You can understand it by slowing a process down. And maybe, going back to your question, you can do it through iteration. Or like shock horror, maybe involve some of the users. Like, one of our things is like, I know, like revolutionary idea, right? Actually get some of the end users involved in the design process. And I personally think we're going to see a rejuvenation in the idea around co-creation. One of the things that Aéto that we push back against is change management. I don't think change management is a thing. I think it's something the workplace industry invented in order to charge more fees to clients to take people on a process, which is basically shittifying their work experience. It's like who wants to run into a space where you've got a smaller footprint with no personal storage, with a coat closet that's 300 miles away, and it's a desk that's not yours, and you can't book it in advance, so you don't know if you're sat next to a colleague. What change management is just comms telling you stuff that you don't want to hear. So we say, bring the end users forward into the design process, create space with them. If you do that superbly, what you'll find is they're rushing towards it. They want to know when they can get into this new space that they've helped create. And you eliminate all of that selling the duff solution to a user who doesn't want to use it just because you've designed it in isolation.
And if I can just throw one thing on the end of that, it's also figuring out when something doesn't work, fixing it. I don't know how many tours we've been on with clients in their buildings and going, yeah, and this is a problem, or we'll point something out and they'll go, oh, I know. And we're going, well, what are you doing about it? And they're like, yeah, I think that's not acceptable. It's like in your first kind of days, months, whatever, in a new space, like you'll figure out what works and what doesn't. And then you have to have a plan to figure out, to solve the stuff that doesn't work. Because employees are going to notice it. And I think it's just like the stained carpets and the paint touch-ups we touched on earlier. If you're not solving it, employees are going to notice and go, okay, they just don't give a shit.
So that person that Alison's like, you're asking, what are you going to do about it? And they tell you, yeah, I don't know. But there's a thought bubble coming out, right? That they're not iterating, that says, I'm going to leave that for another 10 years because I've run out of budget. And the last thing I want to do is admit that I got it wrong. And the designers have fled the hills because we fell out with them in the last stages of the detailed design. And the contractors had his retention. So yeah, nothing's going to happen. And it's somehow okay. But it's not okay. We know it's not okay. The whole industry has got to step up to say, you're not going to get it right every time. But if we take shared responsibility in our iterative hiccups, let's not call them mistakes, like
Learning.
none of these things are unfixable, right? None of these things are permanent, cast in stone and concrete. Most of the ones that we see are easily changed.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about the whole infrastructure of support, right? So it's obviously the customer signing off on these things or realizing that they're making the same mistakes over and over. But then there's the service industry, right? That's supporting, a large portion of, office space across the globe. And they are making the same mistakes from customer to customer, right? And from one location for a customer to another. And I love the example of the kitchenette, right? A space that we should all feel familiar with, right? I go into my friends' houses all the time, and I can kind of figure out where the trash can is in their kitchen, right? When I go into customer offices, when I go into a WeWork, when I go into any other kind of co-working space, right? It's kind of an almost expected experience now that I'm not going to be able to find where the recycling bin is in the kitchen, right? This is kind of everyone. It makes you feel like there's something that you're missing, right? I think there's that feeling part of it that employees are experiencing when they feel a part of that they are missing the information or they're missing, just knowing where these things are. And yeah, I think it's a really important topic to bring up of how many times will we make these mistakes that do seem simple before.
And it's like,
changes. And I want to know who's building the Tesla of the garbage can location, right? And I hope it's working, or maybe it's not, and maybe that's why it hasn't been brought back.
and every one of these organizations we're talking about, every organization that we work with has talent strategies, right? So it's not like you're employing dumb people to come in who don't care and don't have an opinion about the absence of a trash can. And I think you've got this, like, you've got a body of employees working for brilliant organizations who are really smart people and they're smart organizations, but they can't find a trash can in the kitchenette because nobody's thought about where it's going to go. Or they have thought about where it's going to
Thought
go.
about the proper signage.
Yeah, or some graphic designers thought they'd do a funky sign on it that doesn't actually clearly make it out which way you separate. And I think it's like, come on, this is like, it's not complicated and difficult. It requires a little bit of time, and maybe that requires a bit of fee, but like a small fee to get it right up front when you're expecting that thing to last for the next 10 years seems like a small cost to us to pay.
I'm going to throw out a little empathy line to existing industry today, in the sense of sometimes it's hard to know, you don't know. And I think that's where the value is in having outside people come in and kind of identify some of those things. So, that unfortunately, that dirty kitchenette might have just become the norm, and we have biases that are in our mind to just kind of accept that as, that's what the reality is. And while we have someone from the outside being like, yo, did you see that these dishes are causing all this other havoc around it? And so I think there's some value in that part of, working with our customers to kind of help them identify some of these gaps in their designs.
Brad, in your world, there's lots that's easily measurable. In our world, there's lots that's easily measurable. But sometimes you have to get to a certain altitude on that new hierarchy of needs.
Right.
Where you say, the stuff at the top is harder to prove. Like I can't prove that if you walk into a reception area of a large corporate organization and they've got a scent in that space that is uniquely theirs, that evokes that organization, I can't prove that it has any ripple effect on pride or on customer retention or on a young graduate coming in for an interview selecting that organization over the other offer they get. But I think it comes to sort of brand authenticity and knowing who you are. A lot of what we do with clients is trying to educate them around the definition of brand. Brand is what people say about your organization when you're not in the room. It's not a logo or a color scheme. It's what people say about you. And I think if you think about the grubby pantry or the bathroom that's run out of, whatever, it's got 2 hand dryers broken and there's no towels, or the bin's overflowing, or one of the spaces I was in a couple of weeks ago where it had been exquisitely designed, but the soap dispenser in the bathrooms was such that when you pulled the little thing or they had a sensor, it sort of offered 2 blobs. So you got one on your hand, which you thought was your blob, and you started washing your hand, and then suddenly a blob just plopped on the floor. Yeah, and it's like, so we see these things and we laugh and we joke about them, but they're illustrations of a lack of attention to detail. And if you've got intelligent people working in intelligent organizations who want to respect and give their all in their role in that organization, we've got to equally give our all in providing spaces that are effective and work.
That hidden hand towel.
Or with a little etched logo on the mirror.
The little hand towel up underneath the mirror.
Yeah.
Why? Well, honestly, we could go all day on this. You two have been fabulous. I think, to wrap things up, maybe we just close it out. What's one thing, how do we unshittify work? I know that's a very broad thing, but just if you could give a general stroke of that, like, what do we need to stop doing or start doing?
To me, attention to detail. Little stuff matters. People ignore small stuff because they don't think it makes a difference. But I think the accumulation of small details that are overlooked, it absolutely will have an impact. So I think pay attention, get the big stuff right, but pay attention to the details. It all matters.
I think the one for me, which follows on from Alison's a bit, is have a much, much higher empathy for the role that person is in contributing to that organization. So whether it's somebody who's walking into a conference room and trying to power up a call with 20 different remote participants and 3 people in the room, or it's you're ordering coffee for a client who's come into that space with you, or you've got 5 colleagues that you suddenly need to have a scrum session with and you can't find a room, whatever it is, like, it's just put ourselves in the shoes of that employee, in the role they're in that building, in that organization, in that line of business, with that pressure on their shoulders to deliver to their quarterly appraisals. I don't think the design industry is afforded enough time to be able to do that. So I think that falls back to the client. You've got to afford the advisors around you the time to understand your business at an exquisite level of detail. Then you can, to Alison's point, then you can get passionate about designing to the detail.
Thanks so much to the Aéto team for joining us. Lots of great insights and practical takeaways on what it takes to de-shittify the workplace. Remember, a well-designed workspace isn't just about looking good, it's about empowering your team to perform at their best.
And thank you to all of you for joining us on this journey to transform the future of work. If you like this episode, share it with someone on your team who's curious about the future of workplace experience.
We'll be back soon with more conversations like this. Until then, keep learning, keep adapting, and keep working forward.